Some sounds you never forget. Not the crash of thunder, not a car alarm, not even the scream that startles you awake at 3 in the morning. No, the sounds I'm talking about are quieter than that, slower, the kind that reach you before your brain even knows what it's hearing. A creak on the floorboard, the soft, wet press of something against wood, one after another, coming upstairs. Tonight, 3 people are going to tell you exactly what they heard, what they saw, and what they found when they finally got the courage to look. Stay with me, because I promise you, by the end of this, you are going to think very differently about the sounds your house makes at night.
I've never been the type to believe in anything I can't explain. I grew up in a family of scientists. My mother was a cardiologist, my father a civil engineer. Ghost stories were just that, stories, and I was proud of that rational mind, right up until the night it completely failed me. I was 28 when it happened, living alone in a townhouse in rural Pennsylvania. It was a beautiful old place, built in the 1890s with original hardwood floors and a narrow staircase that groaned every time you stepped on it. My realtor called it charming. I called it home. The first few months were peaceful. I worked from home, rarely had visitors, and kept odd hours. I'd often be up past midnight, working under the warm glow of my desk lamp while the rest of the street slept. I loved it, loved the quiet. I should have been more suspicious of the quiet. It started on a Tuesday in November. I'd had a long day, and I fell asleep on the couch downstairs around 10. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up, not gradually, suddenly, like someone had snapped their skull inside my skull. And I heard it, a sound from somewhere above me, a slow, rhythmic press against the hardwood floor of my bedroom upstairs. Step, pause, step, pause, like someone walking very, very carefully. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses do that, but houses don't move in a straight line from one side of a room to the other. My phone was upstairs, of course it was, and the nearest landline was in the kitchen, the light switch for which was on the far wall. I sat perfectly still on the couch, barely breathing, listening. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. Just stopped, like whatever it was had reached the landing and stood there, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like hours. Eventually, the silence became heavier than the fear, and I forced myself to stand. I grabbed the fireplace poker from beside the hearth, the most absurd weapon in the world, but somehow it made me feel safer, and I crept toward the stairs. That's when I saw them. In the thin strip of moonlight falling through the window at the top of the landing, footprints, dark, wet, irregular footprints on the stairs, coming down. They stopped 3 steps from the bottom, right where the moonlight ended and the shadow began. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to look into that shadow. But I am, regretfully, a scientist's daughter, so I looked. Nothing was there. I searched the entire house, every room, every closet, the attic which I had to pull down with a cord, and which smelled suddenly and overwhelmingly of rust and copper. I found nothing, but the footprints were real. I photographed them. I sent them to my father, who told me I'd probably tracked something in without noticing. I had them analyzed by a friend who worked in forensics. She called me back 4 days later, very quiet, very careful with her words. She said, "The sample matches human blood, type AB negative, and I don't know how to explain this to you, but the foot that made those prints was missing its 3rd and 4th toes." I moved out the following weekend. I never went back. And to this day, whenever I hear that slow, deliberate creak from somewhere above me, I don't look up. I just leave.
I want to start by saying that I am not an anxious person. I was in the military for 6 years. I've been through situations that most people couldn't imagine. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because I need you to understand how seriously I'm calibrating what I'm about to say. What I saw that night scared me more than anything I encountered in 6 years of active service. It was 2019. I was house sitting for my neighbor, Dan, while he and his wife were on a 2-week vacation in Greece. I'd done it before. Their house was bigger than mine, had a better TV, and Dan always stocked the fridge before he left. I looked forward to it. The house was a big Victorian on the corner of our street, 3 stories. I'd been in it 100 times. I knew it well, or I thought I did. On the 5th night, something woke me up around 3 in the morning. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure change, the kind you feel in your ears before a storm. I lay still for a moment, getting my bearings, and then I heard it, a sound from the ground floor, something wet and slow, dragging across the kitchen tile. I sat up and grabbed my phone. No service, which was strange because I always had full bars in that room. I turned on the flashlight and moved to the bedroom doorway. The hallway was clear, but the smell hit me immediately. Something iron and organic, like a butcher's shop on a hot afternoon. I've smelled blood before in my life. I knew what it was. I moved to the top of the stairs and looked down. The staircase was wide and straight, a beautiful period feature, all dark walnut, and all the way up it, on each step, were bloody footprints, both feet, a full stride. Someone had walked upstairs, and they were bleeding badly. I'm going to be honest with you. My first rational thought was someone had broken in and was injured. Someone needed help. That's the kind of thing that gets trained into you. Assess, don't panic, move toward the problem. So that's what I did. I went down the stairs, following the prints in reverse, back toward the kitchen. The trail led to the back door, which was locked from the inside. No broken glass, no sign of forced entry. The back door was deadbolted, chain still on, which meant whatever made those prints hadn't come in through the door. I followed the trail the other way now, upstairs, 3rd floor, Dan and his wife's master bedroom. The door was closed. The footprints stopped right at the threshold. I stood there for a long time with my hand on the doorknob. A man who's been in combat and never hesitated stood outside a bedroom door for what felt like 10 full minutes before he turned the knob. The room was empty. The bed was made. The window was closed. But in the center of the room, on Dan's pale cream carpet, was a single handprint in blood, palm flat, fingers spread wide, like someone had pressed their hand down into the floor and pushed themselves to standing. I called the police. They took a report. They found no intruder, no DNA match in any database, no explanation for the entry point. When Dan came home, he went white when I told him, not the scared kind of white, the remembering kind. He told me that the previous owners had moved out suddenly in 2011, that they'd never explained why, that when Dan and his wife first toured the house, the realtor had said the carpet on the 3rd floor had been replaced. I asked Dan why they replaced the carpet. He said he'd never thought to ask. He sold the house 14 months later, didn't tell the buyers why either. Some silences, I think, are contagious. I booked the cabin because I needed to disappear for a while. That's the best way I can put it. I was going through something, a long, quiet grief, and cities started to feel like too much noise around too much pain. So I found a cabin rental about 3 hours outside of Portland. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, a creek nearby. Just what I needed, I thought. It was only a 2-day trip. I arrived Friday afternoon, unpacked, made dinner from the groceries I'd brought, and sat on the porch watching the trees go dark. It was peaceful. It was exactly what I'd come for. I went to bed early, around 9, completely at ease. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I reached for my phone automatically, and the numbers burned into my brain the way numbers do when the rest of your mind has gone completely blank from fear. There was someone in the cabin. Not a ghost, not a feeling. I could hear them. Below me, I was on the loft level. There were footsteps on the wooden floor of the main room. Heavy, deliberate. Not the stumbling footsteps of someone who'd wandered in by mistake. These were slow and purposeful, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. I didn't move. I lay in the dark loft, facing the ceiling, and I listened to them move around the room below me. They walked to the kitchen, back to the main area. They stopped at the base of the loft stairs. That's when it went silent. The ladder to the loft had 12 rungs. I counted them many times in the silence that followed. I lay there for what I can only estimate was 40 minutes, unable to move, barely breathing, waiting, listening for the creak of that first rung. It never came. Sometime around 4 in the morning, I built up enough nerve to reach over and turn on the small bedside lamp. I looked toward the loft ladder. On the floor, at the base of the ladder, very clearly visible in the lamplight, were 2 bloody footprints, side by side, facing the ladder, like someone had stood there, right at the edge of the base, and stared up at the loft. Just stood there and watched. I want you to understand what that meant to me. Whoever or whatever it was had been close enough to hear me breathe, had stood right there, and for whatever reason had chosen not to come up. I have never packed so fast in my life. I threw everything into my bag in under 3 minutes and drove the mountain road in the dark, shaking so hard I had to pull over twice. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station with lights, unlocked the door, and called a friend from the payphone inside because my hands were too unsteady to dial on my phone. I filed a report with the rental company. They were apologetic. They offered a refund. But when I pressed them, when I told them what I'd found, what I'd heard, the woman on the phone paused just a moment too long. She told me that the previous renters that month had left early too, and the month before that. She said they didn't know why. She said the cabin had been recently cleaned and inspected. She said there was no explanation. But here is the thing that still keeps me awake sometimes. The thing that comes back when a house is too quiet and the shadows lay wrong. Those footprints were going toward the ladder, not away from it. Whoever was in that cabin wasn't leaving when they stopped at the base of the stairs. They were deciding.
3 people. 3 houses, 3 sets of bloody footprints, each one leading somewhere they never should have gone. You know what's strange? All 3 of them told me the same thing independently when I asked them what they would have done differently. They all said, I would have left sooner. Not I would have investigated, not I would have called for help, just left sooner. So, I'll leave you with a question to think about tonight. In your home, right now, in whatever room you're sitting in, how well do you actually know the sounds it makes? And if you heard something slow and wet moving on the floor above you, how long would it take you to leave? Sleep well and keep the lights on.